12-year-old boy named Liam saved an elderly man during a flood, all by himself, without any help. The next day, a sleek black car stopped in front of his house, and the driver delivered a message that left him speechless. The sky turned grey, and the first raindrops pounded on the worn-out rooftops. Liam stood by the window, staring out at the street as the rain got heavier. The water already filled the potholes along the road, and the sound of distant sirens echoed through the neighborhood. He knew what this meant. Trouble was coming. "Liam, close that window, honey," his mom, Marissa, called out from the kitchen. Her voice was tense. She was trying to focus on the soup boiling on the stove, but the worry was evident in her tone. Liam did as he was told, though his eyes lingered outside. He watched people hurrying along the street, some holding plastic bags over their heads, others shouting to each other as the water climbed higher. His heart beat faster, remembering how quickly the rain could turn into a full-blown flood. He grabbed an old raincoat, worn and a little too small, and slipped it on. His mom noticed him heading for the door. "Where are you going?" Marissa asked, her voice sharp with concern. "Just to check on the neighbors, Mom. I won't go far, I promise," Liam replied, looking at her with the steady gaze she always found hard to argue with. She frowned but nodded. She knew people might need help, and she also knew she couldn't stop him. The rain was cold and heavy, drenching his sneakers almost immediately as he stepped outside. He moved quickly, splashing through puddles as he headed toward Miss Carter's place. She was old, frail, and lived alone. Liam knocked hard, the sound barely audible over the roar of the rain. "Miss Carter! It's Liam!" he shouted. He saw the old woman peek through the window, her face etched with worry. He opened the door and helped her to her feet, guiding her outside where a neighbor took over, helping her to safer ground. Liam nodded to them and moved on. The water was rising fast now, swirling down the street and carrying debris, old newspapers, cans, branches. It was chaos. As Liam turned the corner, he spotted Mr. Howard. The elderly man was struggling in his yard, his feet already halfway submerged, trying to grab onto his mailbox to stay upright. Mr. Howard was kind, always greeting Liam with a smile whenever they passed each other. But now he looked terrified. Liam froze for a moment, his stomach twisting. He remembered the last time water came like this. His grandfather had been trapped in his house, the water rising too quickly. Liam was just a kid then, helpless. He shook his head, forcing the memory away. This wasn't about the past. "Mr. Howard," Liam shouted, running toward him. The old man tried to speak, but his words were lost in the noise of rushing water. Liam could see Mr. Howard's legs slipping, his grip weakening. "Hold on!" Liam yelled, pushing forward against the current. The water hit him like a wall, cold and relentless. He almost lost his footing but kept moving, step by painful step. The rain lashed against his face, and he squinted through it, focusing on Mr. Howard's terrified eyes. He reached him just as the old man's fingers slipped off the mailbox. Liam lunged, grabbing Mr. Howard by the arm. It was a strong hold, but Mr. Howard was heavy, and the current was working against them. "Leave me, boy," Mr. Howard gasped, coughing as water splashed over his mouth. "Save yourself." "No way," Liam grunted, pulling him closer. His feet slid on the ground beneath the water, but he held on. "We're both getting out of here." He looked around, desperate for a place to go, a point of safety. He spotted a house a few feet away, its porch just barely above the rising water. It would have to do. Adjusting his grip under Mr. Howard's arms, Liam planted his feet and pushed through the current with everything he had. It was slow going. Each step felt like dragging a boulder uphill. His legs burned, his breath came in gasps, and the cold water made his muscles ache. Finally, they reached the steps of the porch. Liam shoved Mr. Howard upward, practically lifting him onto the first step before climbing up himself. He collapsed next to Mr. Howard, both of them gasping, soaked through, and shivering from the cold. You saved me, kid," Mr. Howard said, his voice shaking. Liam nodded, trying to catch his breath. "No one's getting left behind," he said simply. The rain still poured down, and they could hear the water swirling below, rising inch by inch. They couldn't stay there forever, but at least for now, they were out of the worst of it. Liam looked around, trying to figure out the next move. No rescue teams were in sight yet. They were on their own. "Stay with me, Mr. Howard. We'll get through this," Liam said, determination creeping back into his voice. He tried to push away the fear. It wasn't over, but they had a chance. The hours crawled by, the rain unrelenting. The roof of the porch creaked ominously under the weight of the waterlogged wood. Liam knew they couldn't stay much longer. He scanned the area and spotted an old garage with a low roof, just barely visible through the sheets of rain. It was their only hope. "All right, Mr. Howard," Liam said, standing up despite the stiffness in his legs. "We've got to move again." The elderly man groaned, but nodded, leaning on Liam as they made their way into the water once more. The current was stronger now, tugging at Liam's legs, almost sweeping his feet out from under him. He tightened his grip around Mr. Howard, who stumbled and coughed as the freezing water reached his waist. "Just keep moving," Liam muttered to himself, every muscle in his body screaming in protest. Step by agonizing step, they fought their way toward the garage. Debris floated past them, and at one point, a massive branch hurtled toward them, forcing Liam to duck and pull Mr. Howard down with him. Finally, they reached the garage. Liam leaned against the wall, his entire body trembling from exhaustion. He looked up, eyeing the rusted drainpipe that ran up the side. "It'll have to do," he muttered. "I'm going to help you climb," Liam said, steadying Mr. Howard and guiding him to the pipe. It groaned under their weight, but held as the elderly man slowly made his way up. Liam pushed from below, his hands numb against the cold metal, until Mr. Howard collapsed onto the roof. Liam climbed up after him, his arms and legs burning with the effort. They lay there, panting, soaked to the bone. "Thank you, Liam," Mr. Howard said quietly, his voice barely audible over the rain. I don't know how to repay you." "You don't need to," Liam replied, staring up at the sky as water splattered on his face. "Just stay alive." They huddled together on the roof, the rain pounding relentlessly, the water below continuing to rise. Night fell, cold and dark, and Liam fought to stay awake, his body stiff and aching. Mr. Howard drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow but steady. In the early hours of the morning, just as Liam's hope was beginning to waver, he heard a sound that made his heart leap, a rhythmic thumping growing louder. He looked up and saw a helicopter slicing through the grey sky, its spotlight sweeping over the flooded neighborhood. "They see us!" Liam shouted, waving his arms frantically. The spotlight stopped on them, and a rescuer leaned out, giving a thumbs up. Relief flooded through Liam as they were hoisted into the helicopter, one after the other. Inside, Mr. Howard was immediately tended to by paramedics, his face pale but alive. Liam sank into a seat, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. He closed his eyes, the sound of the helicopter blades a comforting hum. When they landed at an emergency shelter, Liam was reunited with his mother and sister. Marissa pulled him into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "I was so worried about you," she whispered. "You're so brave, Liam." The next day, the sleek black car arrived. The man who stepped out introduced himself as Andrew, Mr. Howard's son. He handed Liam an envelope filled with money, a gesture of gratitude for saving his father's life. Liam hesitated, overwhelmed, but Marissa nodded, her own eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "This will help us rebuild." As Andrew drove away, Liam held the envelope tightly, the weight of what he had done finally sinking in. It wasn't just about saving Mr. Howard. It was about the community, about helping each other through the storm. In the weeks that followed, Liam and his family used the money to repair their home. Neighbors came together, working side by side to rebuild what had been lost. Slowly but surely, life returned to Oak Ridge Lane. And though the flood had left scars, it had also brought people closer, reminding them of the strength they found in each other.